So we're going to begin with our meeting today. It was enthusiastically endorsed by Stephanie Kwolek, our newsletter editor. And, you know, I can never say no to Stephanie. This is author Melany Kahn, who started hunting for mushrooms in Vermont in 1968 when her family bought a farm in West Brattleboro. I wish everybody's family would buy them a farm with the time when they wanted to go hunting and all that. She attended Wesleyan University. She's got a BS in English and creative writing. She holds a master's in social work from Boston College and a master of fine arts in film from the Tisch School in New York. Melany lives in New Hampshire with her husband and children. You can find her leading mushroom walks or foraging at every opportunity. And a lot of this enthusiasm is now in her book, Mushrooming. I'm sorry, Mason Goes Mushrooming, which I'm sure you can find at many wonderful booksellers. So I'm going to end the poll, and I see, yes, we cannot wait for, oh, here, I'll show you, then you can see it, share the results. Yes, cannot wait, 11 out of 17. Not yet, maybe next year. I totally understand that no way I live too far away, but we're so glad you're here in any case. So just get rolling. So Mrs. Kahn, please step. Oh, you need to unmute yourself. Sorry, when I mute for all,
Okay, yeah, no,
you
Melany,
too.
please.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Gosh, it's so nice to see almost 30 of you up on a Monday night wanting to talk about kids getting back out into the woods or starting in the woods or continuing in the woods or cemeteries or fields or urban areas with foraging and mushrooming. And I thought how we would structure our time together is for me to talk a little bit about my involvement and why I wrote a book about mushroom foraging with children, and my enthusiasm for it and the benefits of it and the challenges of it, and then open it up to a really interactive discussion. I'd be very curious to know, almost all of you are on audio, video mute, so I'm not 100% sure how you want to interact, but I love interacting. I wish we were in person right now in the woods. And part of why I wrote this book is to get away from doing just the kind of thing that we're doing right this second, and more back out into an interactive environment where we're actually in nature and potentially foraging for wonderful wild mushrooms, which kids, turns out, love to do. So I am going to just tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book and why my enthusiasm for mushrooming with kids is maybe beyond what is in the current lexicon of the landscape of the world of how people see kids in their relationship to foraging and to fungus. I am a second generation forager. My parents started foraging when I was very young, and they brought me along, and it was always a babes in arm kind of a thing. My parents were both artists, and I like to tell the story that my dad was a landscape painter, so if you didn't have a book or a basket in the car, you were bound to be bored. And it really helped if you could jump into the woods and go foraging with my mom or with my sister and find what was nearby, because otherwise you were sitting around and waiting for him to finish. And he was a very enthusiastic mushroom forager and taught us kids very young, which is essentially the message that I'm giving to parents and grandparents, that this is a multi-generational, really wonderful way to engage with the family out in nature. And it doesn't necessarily need to be hunting for edible mushrooms, although that is my lane. My particular interest is in culinary wild edible mushrooms. But it does, the focus and benefits are to get really present with whatever is in the woods, whether it's a turkey tail or a spider web or a newt or an edible mushroom. There's so much to see and be seen in the woods that it's a wonderful place to start. And I like to start with beginner mushrooms. So in Mason Goes Mushrooming, which is about my son, Mason, who turned 20 this past weekend and still loves to forage in the woods. We used to take him out mostly with mycology groups. And I am a huge fan of going out with your local mycology group and learning how to mushroom from other amateur or more serious mycologists. It's an oral tradition. It helps to be able to touch and feel and smell and be next to these beautiful objects rather than looking at them on a one-dimensional, screen or book. Plus you have the advantage, of course, of all of that group-sourced, crowd-shared knowledge. And I'm sure all of you have been to mushroom walks where people are holding up the boletes and discussing exactly which varietal or species and genus and everything else it is, and which Latin name and so on. That's all well and good. And I 100% have done that myself. But when you're working with kids in the woods, it's much more about the exciting things that mushrooms can do. So for example, you go over to a puffball that is a little bit old and you stomp on it and you see the spores explode and the kids go like, wow. And you start to be able to have the introduction to the reproductive system of fungi and why they're spreading all those spores, etc. So those are just some of the very few things you can do that fall far short of having to ingest and eat mushrooms if you're just starting out. Now, I'm assuming that many of you are not just starting out, but you're really interested in bringing the little ones along. And there are many, 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 many reasons why, as folks who are interested in fungi and mycology, we should be concerned and interested in bringing the little next generation of future foragers into the fold. The number one reason is that, as Baba Dayom said at the United Nations, we conserve what we love. We love what we know and understand, and we know and we understand what we're taught, right? So here we are, we have all of this passion and knowledge for mushroom hunting, for the interest in the fungal world. And if we want that to continue and we want to have that world available to all of us, it's really, really wonderful and important to bring along the little ones so that they get this opportunity that we share, or this potential passion that we have to experience the joys of mushroom hunting, which is essentially like a treasure hunt, right? It's searching for the seashell in the ocean. It's finding that, gorgeous morel in the grass. Kids love the treasure hunt of mushroom hunting, just as we adults know, when you find the honey hole, when you find the mother lode, it's an exciting moment, right? And by definition, you never know when you're going out in the woods what you're going to find, right? That is the joy of mushroom hunting. And the more knowledge you have, the more exciting it is to go out and pick something up and go, I know what this is. I know that this is a black trumpet mushroom. I've been at this spot before. I've been here with experienced mycologists. I can go home and now I can eat this and I can put it in the frying pan and have a crispy, delicious, wonderful black trumpet mushroom covered with sea salt. And a little one gets their first experience, even if they don't necessarily like mushrooms. I've seen many ones say, oh, this is really good, after tasting a mushroom that they have foraged themselves, learned themselves, understand, and then cooked themselves. So my book has 4 beginner mushrooms, what I call beginner mushrooms: the morel in the springtime associated with the tree, and then the recipe and the adventure with that, the recipe being a morel omelet, and then a chanterelle in the summertime after the thunderstorms come, and a chanterelle pasta. And we can talk about cooking. I'm very excited about cooking with fungi. And a lobster mushroom in August. Again, a super exciting mushroom for kids to find. They love to hide under those leaves that are attached with that sticky substance. And then, of course, in the fall, you've got to go after your friend, the black trumpet. We were out in the woods today. These are, fabulous, delicious smelling black trumpets, and they are incredibly sneaky and they don't like to be found. So and these are a wonderful beginner mushroom that, most kids are close to the ground. They don't need glasses like we all do. They can see these things. So mushrooming with kids, by the way, for us grownups who are, slightly old and can't see anymore like myself, it's like a great new set of eyes, right? Because then they get really into it. So, so those are some of the reasons that I'm excited about the next generation of mushrooming. I also love to do things with kids having to do with mushrooms. This past weekend, my illustrator and I were in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Festival, and she did these wonderful mushroom finger art, and we had the kids making this. So this is Mr. Lobster Mushroom, and I think he's pretty fabulous. And then she did a whole series. This is Professor Morel. But these are the kind of things that you can get kids involved and excited about mushrooms that don't necessarily have to do with the quote unquote scary part of mushrooming. I like to say that I think mushrooming has gotten a particularly bad rap in the world of, parents saying, don't touch that. Don't even go near that, as if the mushroom might, sneak over and bite you. And I would argue that there are many much more dangerous hobbies and things to do than go out in the woods, foraging and seeing everything that's out there. I mean, you can forage for things like, turkey tails, which are absolutely beautiful, little gorgeous mushroom. You're not going to eat it, but man, you can have some really good fun making beautiful art with a turkey tail mushroom. You can do spore art with the tops of beautiful gilled mushrooms, just leaving them on a piece of paper overnight, letting the spores fall, and seeing those kids just look at that in the morning and go, oh my God, they're purple. I didn't know, the Cortinarius is going to have that kind of a spore. So there are so many ways to come into the woods with kids. And when I say woods, I by no means want to say that this is the urban-rural divide. Not at all. There are mushrooms in cemeteries to beat the band. There's mushrooms in playgrounds. There's mushrooms on the sidewalks. Mushrooms are everywhere. You all know that if you're at all interested in mycology. So the idea that somehow a kid who lives in the city or doesn't have access to their own woods might not have access to mushrooming. It is the most accessible, the freest, the most available, multi-generational, great exercise, great fun that they can do. And at the end of the day, it puts them in touch with being present, being back into nature, being connected to the adult that's with them, or the pet that's with them. I highly recommend dogs. Dogs are a wonderful way to get us back into nature. So all of those reasons are really good benefits. And then there's all the sort of untold benefits that come from having those experiences as a child. I'd love to hear from everybody else here what some of their first experiences were. I have heard now, being on the road talking about this book and talking about the oral tradition of mushrooming, time and time and time again, I have heard a version of the story. Oh, I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Illinois. I grew up in West Virginia, and we used to go hunt for morels. Or my parents used to take us out when the chanterelles came out. I have heard that now so often, and people are missing that. They look back at their experience with their grandparents very lovingly and very longingly, and they connect some part of their childhood to having had this foraging experience with a previous generation. And that is what we're talking about in bringing foraging to a activity that is much less. I'd be very curious to hear from the group as to your thoughts on how to sort of break through the glass ceiling of what's happened. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because there are no books out there for children, zero, none, that tell a story of a child being interested in mushroom foraging and having their innate curiosity, their innate desire to have that connection with that we all experience as adults going out in the woods, of that treasure hunt of finding a mushroom that you know what it is. So not having a book out there to read to my kids, we went out and joined mushroom club walks every Sunday morning religiously. We loved it. We called it the Church of Mushrooming. and learned so much from just our fellow friends and neighbors who were doing it. And we used to have a mushroom walk here at my house that was a culinary. It was, they sort of capped off the summer. And one summer, not too many years ago, after we had had a really terrific summer of rains, we, I think, tasted somewhere between 12 and 14 varieties of mushrooms after that hunt, all, you know, right from the back 40 up here on the mountainside, all choice edibles, all fantastic, and just hit them up in the frying pan with a little bit of sea salt, a little bit of oil and butter, and got to taste each one and decide which ones we like. So I, as you can see, have an incredible amount of enthusiasm for this. I've now talked well past the 15 minutes that I said I was going to start with, because I would love this to be interactive. I would love to hear from all of you as to what your questions might be about how to get started, where to begin, or your own personal experiences with this. There are many, many ways that we can, you know, sort of join together as communities and mycological clubs to encourage the younger generation to follow in this. Okay, I'm going to be quiet.
So I just unmuted. So if somebody wishes to share, they can unmute. How's that? We'll see how that works. By the way, so for myself, my interest in mushrooms began with my grandmother's. One, all of her mushrooms came from a jar with a Jolly Green Giant, and the other one bought fresh mushrooms. And that's where my interest began. I know it's not in the woods, but nonetheless, that was quite a contrast. Hey, Matthew, do you want to talk about how your interest began? He's our president of the Mycological Society. Oh my goodness, this one person keeps. I hope you can unmute yourself. Yeah, he's unmuted. Maybe your microphone's not working, or am I having a hearing problem?
Well, somebody else, Catherine asked what was your first encounter, and Catherine, your story is so similar to the stories that I've heard from so many people, that somewhere along the lines they had the experience of the difference between a jarred or canned mushroom and that, you know, relatively not wonderful texture that comes with those, and the flavor of a wonderful mushroom that was fresh, whether it was cultivated in store-bought or whether it was from the woods. The difference was very pronounced to them as a child. And that is the story that I've heard over and over again.
Oh, Matt says he's back. So you want to share, Matt?
Sure. Sorry about that. I think probably my first memory of something that wasn't a grocery store mushroom was a stinkhorn that came up in our yard as a kid.
Yeah.
It's something that just really was kind of, it was a mutinous, and it was something that would just seem really out of this world to us. And I remember my sister and I kind of being like, what is this thing? What is this coming up out of the ground? So yeah, that was something that really kind of piqued my interests.
Matt, I just want to, I love finding stinkhorns with kids, because mushrooming with children is all about the 5 senses. And my favorite thing to do is, you know, you find a stinkhorn, you, first of all, you know, you got to go with the shape, you know, you've got some comments about that. That's cool, whatever. Right? Yes, mushrooms can very often be very fallacy, and you kind of have to acknowledge that. But the stinkhorn, it's such a pronounced smell, and it's so specific that you know, you can really get the eew factor up, you know, and the eew factor is a great learning tool. It's the same thing. If you see the little wolf's milk, the little one that looks like a pimple, right? Little pink one on the tree log, I'll give them all sticks, right? And say, you know, go pop that pimple. Oh my God, the conversations you can have over pimple popping and mushrooms is extraordinary.
Nice. I believe it. Yeah, that the wolf's milk, that's something. And yeah, slime molds was another thing that kind of got me interested in a botany class. We were given pet slime molds to grow for a while. And so that was a lot of fun too. I know they're not true fungi, but they're still really special, I think. Yeah.
I'm just looking at the chat again. I love that my granddad hunted morels and he took the grandchildren in the woods to show us where he found them. I mean, yes, granddad, you don't want to die with that secret. You know, you want to share that with your grandkids, and that's kind of the bigger message here. And then Zach, I'd love to hear, you were saying that you could share your experience.
Okay, so my name is Zach Spieler. It's nice to meet all you fellow foragers. When I was younger, like growing up as a kid, as a family tradition, we lived in southern Indiana, and we had a woods in our backyard on both properties that we lived in. We lived on a road called 700 South that had a big, almost like football field yard in the back, but behind that there was a section of woods back there, and that's where I first started. My grandparents would take us out and we would mushroom hunt, as like, because old timers always did that. And I grew up with my grandparents, so we'd go out there and mushroom hunt as a family, and we'd find morels, and it was just the best experience ever. And then when we moved on 650 West, we had a woods probably about, like, I'd say 10 total acres, and the woods was somewhere where I grew up and spent a lot of time. We'd go mushroom hunting, and my grandpa always had the luck of finding morels by briar bushes, like right in the middle of briar bushes, and they were growing really prevalent back then in that area, like either by streams or by dead logs, or and my grandpa always found them in the middle of briar bushes, and he'd find some big old yellow sponges. But it was the best childhood experience I could have had doing that.
So Zach, I'm really curious, just to follow up, like, I'm curious for the group too to think about, because I've been asked this question about this a lot, and I love talking to fellow mycologists, people that are already interested and have already had this feeling, but how to put into terms of like what that internal experience is of being with your grandpa, for whom that is obviously so important, and to have that aha moment of finding the mushroom. And for people that aren't into mycology, they don't really always understand that, but kids somehow really do always understand it. And I do a lot of mushroom walks with grownups and kids. And when grownups get it, I did one this morning with somebody who was a first-time forager, and they said, "Oh, I see what the fuss is about," right? And I don't really have a good way to describe the fuss. I just know it when I feel it, and I know why I do it, but I don't necessarily have a great description of that. So I'd be really curious to get a sense of the group, like, what is that feeling?
That's a good question. It's so hard to remember all the way back then when I found my first mushroom, but I feel like I've seen other kids find mushrooms and they're just like, wow, and they're just blown away. When I found my first morel with my grandparents, they were like, Zach, you gotta, focus on the mushroom and have only that in your mind. And as you're walking through the woods, you got to look around like certain kind of trees. And then, like, when we first found one, I think probably my grandparents found one first, and they said, look at that. And I'm like, oh, that's it, like, it's just kind of like, what is that? It's because, the way a morel is kind of all fungaled up, like a thing of snot or something sometimes. Like, look at.
It's a nice dry one for those who are thinking about morels in the middle of September,
It's a
October.
It's a gray color.
This is from a Northwest Burn site up in Canada, and it was dried on site. But I think we can all appreciate that feeling of when you see this in those briars that you were describing, hopefully with no poison ivy around them. That feeling of like, there it is, and then that smell of it too.
My uncle always said you could smell them. I think for me, the respect came later. Whenever I grew older, I was like, man, that was the best thing I could have done as a kid. Learn how to hunt mushrooms. And because it was just something that was instilled in me through my grandparents, and it was like a really powerful thing to do as a youngster.
Well, that's cool. I know we have another person waiting. I hope you don't mind, but Antoinette Badami has been quietly waiting for quite a while. Thought we'd get her going.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm tuning in from Palermo, Sicily. I live in my parents' hometown, and I first foraged with my mom, who was an avid forager all her life in Italy. And we would go north in New Jersey. All three of us kids would get in the car in the station wagon and go up to northern New Jersey and forage for mushrooms. I didn't eat them, but I just remember how excited we were the night before to go out. You know, we'd be going into the woods, and I remember having my basket, and we did that a few times, but then really didn't have the time to continue. I was then reintroduced to mushroom foraging when I was in Torino, Italy. I was here visiting, and my first cousins are avid foragers, and they took me into the woods, and that was wonderful. I don't remember, the names of the mushrooms, but they cooked them the way Melany said, with butter and olive oil, a little bit of salt. And at that time, they were delicious. But the time out in the woods was always wonderful, a great time to unwind, just time to be with family. It was just wonderful downtime. So here in Palermo, I'm looking for a group to begin foraging with, and I have a lot of promises. So we have mild winters like North Carolina. So I'll probably be foraging later this fall. And I should say, I'm a longtime friend of Melany's. I started working with Melany about 30 years ago in public relations. She gave me my first job in public relations. So I'm doing a lot of work with her on the book, sharing Mason Goes Mushrooming with children, just with the public, to bring more. Melany's mission is to bring more and more children into the fold, into the woods, celebrating, the joys of mushrooming. So I'm just really happy to be part of it. And I've learned so much just from the books I've read since February, when I started working with her. So here it is.
Shout out to Italy, yay! And then there's a shout out to Trix, who you started a Fungus Friday. Say more about that.
A shy teacher. Did she walk away for a few minutes?
Okay, well, she said she started Fungus Friday at an elementary school, which I think means teaching. And the part of what we're doing with this book is trying to establish teaching mushrooming again in curriculums in schools, and getting folks back to using, essentially the prepared environment of nature's classroom as easily as, what is that growing under the jungle gym or the edge of the fields of your school. I've taken school groups out all around where I live in southern Vermont and New Hampshire, either after school or as part of the curriculum, and built it into the science part or the art part. That's really wonderful to do. Have folks, have kids doing art with the mushrooms in any way, shape, and form, really getting them comfortable touching them, getting, understanding that they're not scary, they're not gonna, hurt you if you haven't, ingested, if you're not ingesting them, if you don't know what you're doing. So today we were out in the woods, and I was showing this to Catherine before we started. Found a nice big chicken in the woods, which is a little bit elderly. I'm not going to eat it, but I think it's a lovely specimen of what you can just like sort of stumble upon and then have, a really great conversation with a child about everything from, why the, well, like our little friend, Mr. Slug, that just popped off on my hand, what's he doing there? And what's his job and what's going on with all of the decomposition that's happening with the fungus too. There's just a constant flow of surprises that keep happening as you go through the woods and are looking at the world that closely. I think Trix just jumped back in. She was on some sort of jumped off, jumped on, or whether it was a disconnection. But we did. I'm glad she's back because I did want to ask about what Fungus Friday is.
Hi, yeah, thanks for your patience. I had to do some fixing to get my microphone back on. So I am a special ed teacher at a Chicago public school. It's a Montessori magnet school, and I just love going on forays. So whenever I can on a Friday or really anytime, if I find a mushroom, I bring it into the school and if I can, I put one specimen in each classroom for the 3 that I service as a special ed teacher. And I tell the kids, you have to guess what this mushroom is. And it prompts them to research to find out what kind it is, to find the name of it. And then whoever guesses it right, I give them a little bag of snack chips. And they just go nuts over it. The one problem is there's not a single book of on mushrooms in our library. So I have bought some field class, but those have kind of disappeared a little bit.
Yeah.
And the kids are just loving it. Now I've done it for a couple of years, so now they're starting to ask some more complicated questions about mushrooms. And I really want to, I want to stock their library with mushroom books, but I can only spend so much money.
Sure. Well,
But they love it.
If you want to ping me through Catherine separately, I would be more than happy to make sure that your school library has a copy of Mason Goes Mushrooming, which is essentially geared to exactly what you're talking about, with kids getting out in the woods, doing their foraging, doing their mushrooming. And it's also online on my website. There's a read aloud that's completely free, totally accessible. I have zero interest in making mushrooming unaccessible to kids, including on the commerce side. So on Mason Goes Mushrooming on the website, there's a read aloud that yours truly did, with each page turn and everything else. It's I think 8 minutes long, 7.5 minutes, and it has at the end a little bit of photography and things of kids mushrooming. So very, very happy to share that with any school anywhere. I developed the curriculum for the book with a Montessori school here in Vermont. I've been leading walks there probably about 15 years now, and middle schoolers, 7th and 8th grade, they take their we take an entire morning. The middle school is fantastic and does a morning with a geologist, a morning with an arborist, a morning with a mushroom forager, a morning, they're bringing in every aspect of people who know how to talk about the woods using the woods as the prepared Montessori environment for the kids to learn whatever the subject matter is, whether it's, the geology or studying acreage and doing math. They use the woods for all of that. And that's an incredibly specific to Montessori developed curriculum, because that's exactly what Maria Montessori did. She used the prepared environment to spark the kids' own natural curiosity in what was around them. And it's the woods to me is the most wonderful prepared environment because not only do you know what you're going to find, but you also don't know what you're going to find. So you've got all these fantastic surprises that constantly show up as learning opportunities, one right after the other. There's your newt, there's your salamander, there's your spider's web, there's your feather, there's your bird's nest, on and on. You basically don't have to walk more than 20 feet to have a very rich time in the woods.
By the way, we have a 6-year-old present, apparently, Viola, with a question. Why do mushrooms come back in the same place year after year?
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but maybe somebody else would like to. We can make it a little bit more interactive if anybody wants to weigh in on why are mushrooms perennial? What happens as to why they come back in the same spots year after year? Anybody else want to jump in? No, come on, you all are secret mycologists. All right.
Is that
Come
where
on.
the spores are that the mushrooms leave behind? And so they come back. And it's also probably a friendly location, I would think. But I assume the spores are let out by the mushrooms and then they sit in the place that they're released.
Yeah, you bet. Not only the spores, but also the mycelium, which is the network that connects to all of the huge network down in the bottom underneath the subject there. I'm going to put a book in the chat that is my most favorite book if you want to be knowing about what goes on underneath the soil and how mushrooms are basically the source of everything that's alive in us right now, whether it's the yeast in our bread, to the bacteria and fungi in our gut, to the alcohol that we see consume, to the soil that we're gardening in. Fungus is responsible for all of it, and indeed it comes back in the same spot year after year, with the one caveat, and I think everybody knows this caveat, which is rain and moisture. Mushrooms will be very shy if they don't get enough water into their tubular and hyphaeus system. They need to have that water in order to continue to grow and expand. And the mycelium is always present down below the surface of the earth. And the type of mycelial growth that's down there creates the fruiting bodies, and the fruiting bodies are the mushrooms, right? And depending on the relationship with the tree, so going to the question on the table about why do they come back in the same spot, it very much has to do with the tree. There's a wonderful saying in mycology, find the tree, find the mushroom. Find the tree, find the mushroom. So anybody who spends a lot of time, as I have, car shrooming, i.e. driving around in your car looking for mushrooms, knows that you want to find the trees, especially with morels, in order to find the mushroom, because it's a lot easier to see from far away a big old dying elm tree in the middle of the landscape than it is to see a little morel on the ground that might be below it. So the mycelial network that lives under the ground has a relationship with all of those trees, and certain mushrooms like certain trees and have a better relationship with some trees than others. And we could, talk to their dating apps to find out why that is. But you can also read The Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake to understand a lot more about those relationships, which are just stunning in their complexity, but also in their simplicity, both. And when it rains, the water gets down into that substrate that already exists beneath those trees. And if that mycelium is, for example, a black trumpet, as we talked about, right? Beautiful black trumpet. They will be beneath, usually around here anyway, a beech tree, a birch tree, a black birch tree, and they will be in very limey or soil and alkaline soil, and they will often be, so for example, around where you see quartz in the landscape, because that's part of a limey soil. So in that case, you can find the rock, find the mushroom. It's very interesting, but they are in that soil already. They are there as the and the network is there, and when they get enough rain, they will pop up year after year after year in the same place, which is why there is the famous idea of spots. When you're mushrooming, you might have a spot that you can count on. That is not always the case when when a mushroom is relying on a tree that is in its, is degrading or starting to decompose. It's not always the case that the mushroom will come back, because once the tree has bid its adieu and said goodbye to that soil system, often the mushroom will give one last fruiting and then also not come back in that spot. And I've certainly seen that many times. So I hope that was a very, very long answer to a short question about why they come back in the same place every year. But it's a wonderful question, and it's happy news for us mushroom foragers, because sometimes it makes the walk a little shorter if you already know where you're going, right?
And in fact, Bill Becker left a comment earlier saying, my granddad hunted morels in southeast Iowa. And when he was dying in 1973, he took the grandchildren into the woods to show where he found them. He shared his spots.
Yeah.
In fact, we had a member years ago who moved to another part of the country, and he auctioned off his favorite morel spots.
He auctioned them off, did you say?
Yes.
I've never heard of such a thing. That's terrific.
It was funny. And then another Antoinette shared, I remember foraging with my mom at the age of 7 in New Jersey. She foraged all her life in Sicily.
And I want to say something about spots, because a lot of people ask me, you take so many people in the woods and you're always showing them your spots, or you're showing them, today I went to a nearby lake with a couple of friends, and a couple of them are active foragers, and it's a fantastic spot, but it's a huge lake, and we covered like 1/1000th of the area around the lake, right? So I said to my friend, well, Danny, if you go back there and you can cover some more ground and find some more spots in this area, that would be fantastic. And we'll just, it's sort of like crowdsourcing them. The idea of spots is essentially, to me, it means that you've put the time in, you've walked, you've done your due diligence, and you have figured out where some mushrooms are. But in truth, there are mushrooms everywhere. So we just can't cover that much ground. And if you look out, over the hills and valleys, you think, my God, every single tree there, every single mountainside is just covered in mushrooms. And we just can't get to all of them. So I sort of have this opposite idea about spots. I think if we all shared our spots, then we would all find a whole lot more mushrooms. So I know it's a very controversial sort of way of looking at it in terms of people who are, auctioning them off and being sacred about it. But I do think there is a lot of joy also in sharing our knowledge of where mushrooms are, so that more people can find them.
Zach, who commented earlier, he wanted to know from Antoinette, what kind of mushrooms do they find in Italy? Is she still here? Maybe she'll unmask or unmute.
Oh, I just unmuted.
Good.
I am a newbie, and when I foraged with my only time foraging in Italy was in 2013 with my relatives in northern Italy in Turin. And I remember there were morels. Gosh, I wish I had the pictures ready. We got back home and we just put the mushrooms on a wall, and it just was like really long line of mushrooms. There were like 13 of us foraging, and it was a really good feast. I don't know the mushrooms by name though, but there are a lot of different edible mushrooms.
Well,
Go
I
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, go
Well, I love this idea of the drawing a map of where you find mushrooms. It's actually, and this little pal noticing the landmarks on the walk. I think that speaks to the point that I was making at the very beginning. when you do go out in the woods with kids, you can start to see the world through their eyes, which is a real gift to us as grownups. You know, it's sort of the ultimate answer to how was your day? You know, you can actually see the world through their eyes because they tell you what they're seeing. And the other idea that you could map your spots. I mean, think about the huge skill set that's being taught there to a child. The idea of mapping, the idea of being able to put yourself in a place in relation to everything around it and what the landmarks are and where you are in relation, and being able to go back and find that place again. I mean, the number of skill sets that are being taught in that one exercise is vast and really, really awesome. So kudos to the 6-year-old map drawers. How about other people? What, I mean, this is you know.
Well, I am Sue Yellen. I am in Galena, Illinois right now, but I come from Chicago, and I actually wondered if Trix was at Oscar Mayer School, which is a Montessori school near my house. But I was thinking about when my mom first taught me about morels. We were out here where we were sort of city people in the country, and we learned that everybody here ate morels and you could find them and they were pretty unique. So we didn't have to be scared of getting the wrong mushroom. So we went out and she collected a bunch of morels, and she decided she would try to sell them to the local French restaurant in Lake Forest, Illinois, in the suburb. A very fancy French restaurant with a fancy French chef. And she took in her mushrooms, and he sat her down and he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not sure if I'm going to buy them or not, but I will cook some for you. And she was thrilled. He made her the most delicious morels she's ever had in her whole life, until she started thinking about it. And she realized the way he was looking at her, he was waiting to see if she dropped dead or not. And that was, it was sort of, she was the king's taster.
Yeah.
And then he did buy some, but it was like, I don't think we were finding enough to make a lucrative business out of that. But that was my funny story. And then the other was that my husband and I were in Italy in visiting an old housekeeper friend in the mountains, and we found ourselves in truffle land, and we went to a truffle, I don't know what they call it, but where they sell truffles in a little shack in the woods. And I started taking pictures because it was very unique, it was very rustic little shack, and there are truffles everywhere. Where were we? In Umbria. And I thought they were going to shoot me. Really, it was like all of a sudden I was in the middle of the Italian mafia, because there was so much illegal activity going on around the truffles, that somebody coming in and taking pictures of anything to do with the truffles, even if they were totally unidentifiable to anyone else, was a threat to their illegal sales or whatever they were doing. And I think they basically threw us out at that moment, because I was posing such a threat to them. But that was really interesting, because just seeing it in person, how intense it was, the reaction I got from them. And my other thought and question is, I did grow up one of those people who was terrified that if I breathed or touched the wrong mushroom, I might drop dead. My parents really were worried about that, and we didn't know a lot. And I was thinking about how exciting this is, the thought of teaching children. But I wonder what tips you have for teaching kids to explore the woods and explore learning about things without endangering them. Because I do know that, I had kids that would come in my yard in the city, and I always gave them chives, and they love eating chives. They would never eat them on a plate, but outside they would take a fistful and just start munching them. But I always had to tell them, these are chives, these are edible. But the other things you see out here, a lot of them might not be good for you. And so how do you make sure that kids are getting both messages in a friendly way that makes the woods and nature accessible and exciting without terrifying them, but also keeping them safe?
Yeah, Trix, that's an excellent question. The first thing I would say is, I don't think you have to worry about kids being terrified or told no about the woods. That's all they hear. That's the only message they're getting. So, like, just for us to think about as for a second, if any of you have read Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, he's writing about nature deficit disorder. If you haven't, I highly recommend. He's so good at talking about the benefits of the woods, but also how did we get to this place where the woods has become like, the scary zone, the place that we don't go, the place where the witches are, all this other things. And so keeping kids, I think if you go out in the woods or in a cemetery or in a playground with kids and they see a mushroom, you're going to realize right away that the only message that they've gotten is don't touch that. Don't touch that. Don't interact with it. It's bad. It's not good for you. Stay away. And so that little message about the one little mushroom has now been sort of extrapolated to the entire world of nature in the wilderness, which for many, many kids is, by most parents, I mean, not all of us, but a lot of parents, it's a no, don't, stay away, keep you safe message over and over and over again. So I think for me, the question is not so much, how do I, remind them of the things they can't do? It's more of how do I invite them to crack open the window a little bit, to look into the woods, to see the things that they can do, because it has been slammed shut on this generation. And they experience the woods, and even by very well-intentioned, conservationists and educators and everything else, you go to a park, what do you see? You see signs, don't walk on the grass, right? You go into a place like New York City, and what do you have? You have a law that says don't pick or forage anything or you'll get a ticket in any public city park or anywhere else. There's literally laws on the books that say, built into the structure, that forbid children from interacting with nature. So think about that for a second. That's pretty intense, right? So most of us, I'm 58 years old, I didn't really have that as a kid. When I walked through Central Park or wherever as a kid, you could walk on a sheep's meadow, you could walk on the grass. Nah, not so much anymore. So it's more for me about trying to invite little people to consider different messages and different ways of interacting with nature than they currently are. And then slowly but surely, there are kids that I go out in the woods with that won't touch a mushroom. They won't touch them, much less eat them. So it's like we have a lot of stuff to make up, right? And so I start with little small things, you pick up a turkey tail like this, and you say, this is not edible. This is not an edible mushroom, but it's, it's soft on top. It's very velvety. I say, oh, feel it. It's like velvet. And oh, look underneath. And this is an older one, so it's a little dried out, but it's got the polyporous bottom, and it's an invitation to talk about the reproductive life of mushrooms and how spores are spread. But the funnest thing to do with these is to build, very cool. We we built one today. I'll show it to you. Okay, I'm going to show you this. We built this today. Can you see it? So it's got the turkey tails that were already on a stump that have been cut. It's got a beautiful hericium that we found in the woods today, right? Just like tucked into it. Got a little bird's nest on top. I don't know if you can see that. Got another gorgeous spreading, now somewhat dried mushroom. But this is art, mushroom art, right? That you can do with kids just to get them to touch nature again, just to get them to touch it. So, I mean, that was kind of a long answer to that question, but I don't worry about telling them to be safe because that's the only message they've ever gotten.
Well, that's a good message to give us, because I think it does encourage interaction, and that's something we are losing. I taught preschoolers art and clay ceramics, and it was just shocking how many kids were afraid to touch clay.
Right.
You know, or they never made anything with their own hands.
Right.
Without electricity or without, you know, some kind of computer. So I think that's true. I think we really do need to encourage that kind of interaction with care and knowledge. But
yeah, I mean,
not
I want
fear necessarily, but care.
That's exactly right. And I mean, I'm very clear. I am in no way advocating that kids go out from the woods and, you know, pick wild edible mushrooms and eat them without knowledge. I'm advocating the exact opposite. I'm pointing at all of the different ways there are available for us as educators and as parents and as grandparents and teachers to invite children back into nature, and how the opportunities are there, and for us ourselves maybe not to be so shy and scared about it, because these messages are permeating into our world as adults as much as they are into these kids. And it's also very tempting to have a, you know, one-dimensional screen-like relationship. You know, it's really fun to watch Fantastic Fungi. It's a great movie. I also think at some point maybe don't watch Fantastic Fungi and go out in the woods and experience what a fungi feels like, you know? So there's all these temptations to make you feel as if you're having an interaction with nature, but it, you know, you can't touch, you can't smell, you can't taste, you can't observe, you can't do spore print, you can't do any of those things with a mushroom that you see in a screen or a book. And there's a real value to be had in that, and there's a loss in not having that. I want to just point out, and Zachary had mentioned that turkey tails, you can make a tincture with them. That's absolutely true. I like to stick into my lane, which is wild edible mushrooms. I don't do, you know, medicinal, and so I know enough about it to, you know, tell you that I don't know enough about it. But there are certainly things that if you're interested in medicinals that are out there. And then Julian asked one of my favorite questions, which is how dangerous is touching a poison mushroom? And the answer is not dangerous at all. And this is an example of exactly the kind of information, and I call it, you know, mythology. Paul Stamets calls it microphobia, right? There's actually a term for it, where you have like a huge fear of mushrooms that is not necessarily based in science, right? So touching a poisonous mushroom is not dangerous. Ingesting a poisonous mushroom and putting it into your digestive system is dangerous, right? I always recommend after you do anything that you wash your hands. Not a bad idea. So we just learned that last couple of years, a great idea to wash your hands. But touching a mushroom, even that has, you know, in its properties, it has, you have to digest it in order to get, like, you know, deathly ill from it. And there are a handful of mushrooms that obviously that can happen with. But one of the messages that people have all the time that they tell kids, do not touch mushrooms. That is a message that kids basically get from birth. Trix, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I am a big advocate for everything that you were just saying, that we really have to get kids out and digging in the dirt again. And another thing that I like to do is when I see a plant that is indigenous to the area, I will, if there's enough around it that it can be spared, I will pick it and bring it in and have the kids guess what the name of the plant is. And I think it's important to try to pair their curiosity with nature. They're born curious, but we kind of beat it out of them with our technology and with all our rules and worries. But the kids just eat it up when I bring something in and just say, what do you think this is? And then I'll tell them one fun fact. Like one time I brought in chicory and told them that it, the root can be used or was used at one point for a form of coffee. And, if you can just put in one little titillating fact, the ones who have a natural proclivity toward it, they'll just light up.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. Has anybody else had some other, similar experiences with taking either their grandkids or own kids or other kids into the woods and being the one who is sort of introducing that? Let me see if there's and I am aware that we are an hour and 5 minutes into this, and I don't know how long you usually go, but I am happy to continue chatting, answering questions, hearing from folks. To me, this is like the tip of the iceberg of a super exciting time. I don't know if other people notice that there are there's a lot of interest in mushrooms now, all of a sudden, not for me, but it seems like in the general drinking water, there seems to be a lot of folks who are very keen. I 100% of the time advise and recommend that they join their local mycology clubs, because that is the best place in the world, in my opinion, to learn with a group of other folks how to go out into the woods and begin with beginner mushroom, or one at a time. And I have friends who have done that with good effect and found wonderful community in it. I myself am sort of traveling around the country doing that, just that with mycological clubs all around this, various landscapes across America. And there's a lot of mushroom enthusiasts out there, a lot of us. So it's really wonderful to see. And again, any other, if there's any other questions, some of the things that I do, like next week, I'm going to be at our Montessori school here with the elementary school grades, the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. What I'll do is just take an hour and a half. I'll take the group out. There'll be 19 of them. We'll jump into the woods right behind the school. It doesn't have to be a big area. I mean, there's examples of mushrooms everywhere. And even if they're not actual mushrooms, you can talk about things like, I mean, there are mushrooms everywhere. If you, as I say, put on your mushroom eyes and start to look for them, you see them everywhere. But, a log that's on the ground that's starting to really decay, and you sit down next to it and you see all of a sudden that it's, covered with mycelium, or it's covered with little tiny white specks of things that are actually mushrooms. And maybe you have a loop with you and you start looking at things microscopically. I mean, you don't have to know a lot as a grown-up. You really don't, to be very effective as a leader in the woods. And you can just, part of what happens, I think people get nervous about thinking, oh gosh, I need every time a kid runs up to me, with a mushroom, I'm going to need to know what it is. You don't. Part of learning how to mushroom is learning how to say, I don't know, let's go look it up, right? And that's joyous, that's fun. Julian, was there a hand? Did you want to say something?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hey, the Illinois Mycological Society had a booth over at the Chicago Botanical Gardens, and I'm the type of person that I don't know the Latin names of the mushrooms. I don't know
Yeah.
the genus and the species
Yeah.
and stuff. So they put me off with the kids. And one of the drawings there was a follow the numbers from 1 through to probably 22. So I get the kids to, take a pencil and draw it. And it was an earth star mushroom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I would go to them and I'd say, would you like to see this mushroom? And they, yeah. So I would take them, and sometimes their parents would come along, and we would go over to where the earth star was, and you wouldn't believe that their mouths just open, their eyes open, and not only the kids but the parents as well were really impressed with that. So I was put in a little corner there to work with the children, but I really enjoyed it, and I really believe I made some impression on these young minds. I really enjoyed that.
You bet. And Julian, the part I like about that story the best is that you did that because you didn't know the Latin words. And I'm in two camps on that. I mean, obviously, I'm fairly trained at this point, and if you hit me over the head hard enough, I'll be able to come up with a Latin word in my head. But what I have found over the years of teaching kids is that you start talking Latin to kids and you've lost them, like they'd love to know about the Earth Star, but they don't want to know about the hydroglophic in 4 different terms of Latin. They just can't, it's like too much, and it makes them feel slightly overwhelmed and worse, ill-equipped to learn. So I really try to introduce that kind of stuff very gradually and go with common names. Absolutely, to start, because it's sticky, it has traction, the kids can remember it, they can remember shapes, they can remember colors, they can remember that the black trumpet is a trumpet shape and it's black. When you get into the whole Canthonary, all the other Latin names, you're going to lose them, right? So you got to meet the kids where they are, and then once they're hooked, maybe later on they're going to want to learn the Latin name. Absolutely, that's fabulous, but that's not a starting point. And so your story to me is a very, very good one of how to reach a kid exactly where they are at the beginning. I want to hear from Austin, who's got an experience, a comment.
Yeah, just one of going out with kids, let's call them younger teens to mid-teens. We weren't, with our own kids and our kids' friends, we weren't successful at getting all of them interested in mushrooms, but we found that the process of searching for mushrooms was kind of similar to the kids who liked jigsaw puzzles, that it had like a visual aspect. And the kids that liked puzzles, we kind of convinced them, well, look, we're going to go out and it's going to be like searching for the little pieces, and anything you find, then we're going to gather it up, and then we're going to loop back at the end and see what we've found. And that enticed some of them in a way that just the thought of finding different mushroom species was not turning them on.
That's right. Yeah, you need that hook, and you can do it with cutting open a blue staining boletes, and then you show the oxidation. Okay, watch quickly. It's going to go from yellow to blue, right, really fast, right before your eyes. I mean, kids go ballistic over that. How did that happen? What was that? Or go stomp on that puffball. Watch what's happening. Oh my God! It's like it's like fireworks went off. What was that? And yeah, I mean, somebody's talking in the comments. The names are great. Dead Man's Fingers, Witch's Butter. I mean, these are all I think I thought here I've got the, the golden, you've got golden threads, golden needles, like whichever, it's getting late. So, but kids can remember the visual with the color that goes with the name, and then they see it again in the woods a second later and they go, there it is. And then, or it's a coral mushroom that looks exactly like coral in the bottom of the ocean. They love those visual connections. And just opening up a new world. So these are really, for me, very inspiring and enriching stories, which just sort of validate my experience of being out in nature with kids. And I feel like we all have not only a slight responsibility, but sort of an honor of having a little bit of information, a little bit of passion about this and being able to share it.
I thought we would close. I asked Matt to respond to Austin about his efforts at the Botanic Gardens.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm spacing if it was Austin or Julian, but whoever was talking about the Earth stars.
No, it was
that
Julian. That was Julian.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
sorry.
I remember Julian doing that. I remember being really blown away by just how much of a really important and powerful connection they were making with everyone. And that's something I really love about different outreach events like the Chicago Botanic Gardens show that we had, where you have opportunities to talk to so many different people with so many different experiences and backgrounds and so many different life stages. And you have these fun challenges of trying to figure out, how do I connect with this person? And you really figured out a great way to really connect with people. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I'm glad you really enjoyed it. It's something that gets me very excited about fungi too. And I think all of us, I know Melany for sure, and all of us. So thank you very much.
And Melanie, I think it was a fun evening.
I hope so. I certainly enjoyed it.
Great.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you all. That was
Yeah,
informative.
and there's a lot more information on my website, Mason Goes Mushrooming. Lots of free resources. Of course, all the links to all the NAMA groups. You all are up there listed and under those, and photographs and curricular stuff having to do with some of the resources, and like I said, the read aloud and a discounted way to buy it. There's just, I'm really about trying to get the word out. And this is essentially just a calling card to have conversations like this.
Well, thank you very, very much. It was all inspiring, and we'll let you return to your life. And
Yeah, I hope
sleep,
to see
right?
some of you all again, perhaps in the great state of Illinois.
That would be nice.
All
Thank you so
right.
much. Have
Good
a
to
good
meet
one,
you
everybody.
all.
See you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.